Hello everyone, welcome to Commie Reading Group. Today we'll be reading Jodi Dean. Jodi Dean's Capital's Grave. We'll be finishing chapter 3 today. Catastrophic anxiety. The fourth characteristic takes us to effective dimensions of neo-feudalism. The pervasive feelings of insecurity, anxiety, and catastrophe. Umar Hagku describes the existential traumatic shock behind the regressive anti-revolutions associated with Bolsonaro, Trump, Modi, Brexit, QAnon, anti-maskers, and anti-vaxxers. Hegel uses the example of the average American lacking the savings or social safety net necessary for weathering everyday crises like a medical emergency, home or car repair, death in a family, or job loss. Life is marked by constant dread and anxiety and panic, not over anything that might come to be, but things that must be, things for which there is no escape. Like death, birth, and illness. Yeah, I know there's no video today. Welcome in. Hope you're doing well today. Simply existing itself is a task, an ever-growing burden, both economic and psychic. Hegel sees the average American as a powerless neo-serf, a creation unique in modern history, and nominal citizen of a rich country, but one whose every imaginable possibility goes on shrinking by the day. Because he is impotent, castrated, every day can only feel something like either torment or death. People have good reasons for feeling insecure. That the catastrophe of neo-feudal capitalism's exploration of the social surplus in the setting of a grossly unequal and warming planet is real. An embrace of the cryptic, occult, techno-pagan, and anti-modern amplifies apocalyptic insecurity. Adherence to the QAnon conspiracy theory read breadcrumbs drop on online message boards for clues that will help them understand power relations. Prophets and evangelist operating outside of institutional religion offer healing, visions, and predictions. In the U.S., interest in prophecy has expanded into movement proportions. Globally, fear of and interest in witches is rising. According to Bianca Bosker, the latest witch renaissance concedes which with a growing fascination with astrology, crystals, and tarot, which like magic practitioners consider ways to tap into unseen, unconventional sources of power, and which can be especially appealing for people who feel disfranchised, or who have gone weary of trying to enact change by working within the system. Pervasive mistrust of government science ex- exacerbated the COVID-19 pandemic. People with little confidence in experts, their lack of confidence reinforced by then President Donald Trump, embraced pseudo-scientific coronavirus denialism, as well as fake remedies. We can add this to this mix Jordan Peterson's mystical Jungianism, Nick Land's dark alignment, and Alexander Duggan's mythical geopolitics of Atlantis and Hyperborea. Peter Thiel, the billionaire founder of PayPal and Planeteer Technologies, pushes an explicitly neo-feudal worldview. In a lecture in 2012, Thiel explains the link between feudalism and tech startups. No founder or CEO has absolute power. It's more like the archaic feudal structure. People vest the top person with all the sports of power and ability, and then blame them if and when things go wrong. What's interesting here is how feudal structure is rendered as an instrument of freedom. A move Corey Robinson associates with American democratic feudalism, where the promise of democracy is to govern another human being as completely as a monarch governs his subjects. While Theo is happy to jettison the democratic element altogether, he shares the view that freedom is the protection of privilege and that privileges are the expression of an inner genius. Along with other Silicon Valley capitalists, Theo wants to protect his fortune from democratic impingement and so advocates strategies of exodus and isolation, such as living on the sea and space colonialization, whatever it takes to save wealth from taxation. Extreme capitalists goes over into the radical decentralization of neo-feudalism as tech lords fortify their holdings outside the reach of the state. For those on the other side of the neo-feudal divide, anxiety and insecurity are addressed less by ideology than by opioids, alcohol, and food. Anything to dull the pain of hopelessness, mindlessness, endless drudgery. Joanne Delsberg describes the stress caused by constant technological surveillance on the job, the risk of being fired for being a few seconds late, for not meeting quotas, for using the bathroom too many times. Repetitive, low control, high stress work, like the kind that is technologically monitored, correlates directly with depression and anxiety. Uncertain schedules and unreliable pay, because wage theft is ambiguous and work isn't guaranteed, are stressful, deadening. Neo-feudal apocalypticalism can be individual, familial, local. It's hard to get work up about worked up about a climate catastrophe when you're living catastrophe for a few generations. Haku's emphasis on the regressive politics of contemporary anti-revolutions make the link between catastrophism and feudalism. Trumpism, he writes, hopes to make today's impoverished, powerless neo-serf tomorrow's little tribal master over immigrants and minorities. Feudalism is the goal of these anti-revolutions, in which the neo-serf becomes a chieftain in his own right. One of the pure in a promised land. Resonating with Robin's theorization of American democratic feudalism, Haku's analysis lets us see the appeal of neo-feudalism to those who find themselves dominated and constrained. If one isn't free to control another person, one isn't free. The COVID-19 pandemic amplifies the sense of epochal crisis. Hey, is that Luke? How you doing, comrade? Great to see you. And Greg's here too. Cool. Welcome in, y'all. Not only has it realized the global spread of a deadly, contagious airborne virus, already a Hollywood trope, but as millions became infected and died, bodies piling up, countries shutting down, the fault lines of the underlying system as vulnerable and exposed as an emergency room nurse. Darko Suvan highlights the role of neo-feudal land hoarding in the pandemic. Global RG businesses, land grabs, and deforestation releases pathogens from their formal isolation into the human food chain. The pandemic wasn't caused by the virus alone. It resulted from market-driven agriculture, economic immensuration, mega cities, slums, degenerated healthcare, and the global movement of people and products. Such conditions produce pandemics out of viruses. What Suvan calls colonization revealed neoliberal austerity as a policy of mass murder, privatized, diminished, and underfunded healthcare systems failed to meet basic needs. In societies of abundance, there weren't enough beds, ventilators, oxygen, masks, or medical staff. The pandemic demonstrated that essential workers are the most exploited workers, the ones forced to work and left to die. Colonialization revealed the political domination of death cults in the US, the UK, and Brazil. Risking death was treated as a liberating experience of freedom, especially for those able to purchase the means of survival. The calling of everyone else was just what was necessary to achieve herd immunity. During the mass uprisings, the police During the mass uprisings that followed the police murder of George Floyd in May 2020, Black Lives Matter demonstrations in my small city took the form of a nightly pers- per- processions throughout the neighborhood. Accompanied by the steady drumbeat of pots and pans, people chanted, "I can't breathe," "Black Lives Matter," and "We are here." The masks and persistent clanging, the con- congratulating in the wake of fear of infection, gave the processions a medieval vibe. They sometimes felt more like supplicants, supplications challenging the death cults than political demonstrations. Maybe it's better to say that challenging the order of death is a form of politics, takes in new feudal times. This might be one explanation for the intensity of the global movement to stop Israel's genocide against the Palestinians that grew throughout the fall of 2023 and into 2024. Neo-feudalism's catastrophic anxiety flourishes in the effective infrastructures of communicated communicative capitalism where there's no commonly shared meaning. Lies circulate as easily as or more easily than truth, especially when there is nothing to stabilize or guarantee truth. No generally accepted procedures of verification. Outrage trump reason and nuance. With constant communication but meandering incommunicability, we lose the sense not just that no one hears us, but that even if they do, there's no way they can understand us. Meaning is individuated. What matters to me, what I have experienced, what I feel. Under these conditions of what Savolja J. Zeki calls the decline of symbolic infectivity, desperate issues and concerns are equalized. The daily deaths of thousands circulating in the same media space as furry overword choice, and straight up lies. Little registers as significant or everything is equally significant because signification has become so elusive. This fragmentation of the symbolic is another dimension of the parcelitation of sovereignty, the parcelitation of the big other. No master signifier holds meaning together, just as there is no sovereign law, but instead intensive forms of legal privatization and personalized networks of fealty and privilege. Under these fragmented conditions, assuming that one will have one's day in court is naive, and remnants of religious belief in Judgment Day. For most of us, being able to afford a lawyer when we need one, or having a lawyer that could secure us as a fair trial rather than pressure us to take a plea deal, is a fantasy. We're resigned to the fact that the violations we experience, wage theft, denied insurance claims, unwanted sexual intention, unexpected and exorbitant medical bills, exorbitant medical bills, elude legal remedy. The parcelization of the big other manifests in countless ways. Rather than norms, there are expectations. 0-hour contracts are a well-known example. Workers must be available for work then they may not get. Other examples include higher education. Final exams and final grades have lost their finality. Students request various accommodations and exemptions. They ask for extra credit, opportunities to resubmit work, reconsideration. Responding to the personal circumstances of each now appears fairer than subjecting all to a common set of requirements. Airline tickets are another example. Prices are disaggregated and personalized. There is not a standard charge that everyone pays. Airline tickets prices shift by the day, every hour, sometimes depending on prior searches. Once a quoted price is accepted, the purchaser will immediately be presented with multiple additional purchase options, and fees. The purchase ticket can also change at any point as airlines cancel flights, change flight times, or rebook the flight through different airports. Practices that previously had the structure of a contract, whether implied or explicted, I don't fucking know, sorry, have a new degree of fluidity. Expectations of consistency that someone will do what they've agreed, show up on time, now seem harsh, conservative, indifferent to many personal things the other is dealing with. Or worse, keeping one's word is for suckers, those too weak to adjust the pact to their benefit. No wonder so many of us lose the capacity to accept ambiguity, grabbing instead for an impossible certainty, especially when it is not widely shared but understood only by a few prophets, witches, Q, and the crypto guys going on about blockchain. Noteworthy in all these instances is an intense attachment to a certain truth, an intensity that draws its energy from rejection of the common, mainstream, widely accepted, liberal, and democratic. We can add to this mix. The shift from social construction to ontology as prominent reflexes in academic theorizing. appealing to an incense, incense beyond politics and representation shores up our need for certainty in uncertain times. Correlative moves in the culture wars fixate on identity as fundamental ground or guarantor, as if an experience were clear and self-knowledge readily available. In his seminar on anxiety, Lacan discusses the sense of certainty associated with essentialist proofs, based in ideas of perfection of the sort offered by Saint Anselm and Descartes. Lacan argues that the maintenance of this constable certainty in the face of derision, and Soren suggests that it is a displacement in certainty that is secondary in relation to the certainty of anxiety. Doubt is an effort to combat these certainties of anxiety. In contrast to our everyday conceptation of anxiety as a kind of paralyzing doubt, in Lincoln's teaching, doubt shields us from the more disquieting and uncanny certainty of anxiety. Why is anxiety certain? Because it never deceives. Lacan's point involves language, signification, and the speaking subject. Subjects who speak are subjects who can lie. There is an irreducible gap between the speaker and the spoken. We can always ask, why are you telling me this? Or what are you trying to achieve by telling me this? Anxiety is the effect that accompanies signification, testifying to the signifiers feral in the real. When the speaker says maybe a lie, what the speaker says may be a lie. The words I hear might deceive me. My eyes might trick me. Anxiety through is a signal of the real. More specifically, for Lacan, it's the signal of the real of enjoyment. As Lacan explains, Freud viewed anxiety as a reaction to the loss of an object, loss of the mother, of the penis, of love for the object. Lacan disagrees. Anxiety isn't about the loss of the object, but its presence. The objects aren't missing. Rather than lack, there is an abundance, too much, and an overwhelming degree of connection, envelopment, and potential abstraction in the other. Anxiety signals the lack of a lack, the risk of being captured in the other's demand, of suffocating in their enjoyment. Anxiety is an effect that signals an encounter with the real of joyance. It may be that the deep appeal of existential certainty today is the shadow of the certainty of anxiety. As the central effect in the contemporary society, anxiety signals our inability to secure some kind of space where we are free of the other's demand, shielded from their enjoyment. The shift from law to bound, from public to private jurisprudence jurisprudence indexes the legal form of this insecurity. We have to abide by expectations, not clear, indefiable rules, and that means perpetually trying to decipher what the other wants from us. Social network ties us Social networks ties us to so many others that the task is impossible, unfillable. Anxiety doesn't deceive. Put in the other's service, we are become nothing but instruments of their enjoyment. Our servitude the condition of possibility for them to enjoy. Yeah, there's a lot of tough words in this book. Jodi picks a lot of strong words, you know. I've characterized neo-feudalism as a shift from sovereignty to suzerainty. Neo-feudalism has four basic features: parcellated sovereignty, new lords and serfs, hinterlandization, and catastrophic anxiety. My claim is not a historical one about feudalism's fundamental structure. It's that neo-feudalism changes how we see capitalism by drawing out what it what it is becoming. Viewed as a neo-feudalizing tendency, parallelization, fragmentation is not to be embraced as a democratic polarization. It's the new structuring of economic and political power that drives advancing servitude and hinterlandization. Likewise, the rejection of a reason and embrace of mysticalism are indecisive of creating creative flourishing. They correspond to the pervasive anxiety that accompanies the unceasing demands and unavailable enjoyment that the decline of symbolic efficiency makes it impossible to escape. In the following chapter, I develop the repercussions of the decline of symbolic efficiency in neo-feudalism's psychotic atmosphere, the absence of a neo-feudal subject and the proletarian of a fragile, rivalrous others. And that was chapter 3. Let's see, how much do we have left here, this book? Oh, so we pretty much have like one more chapter and then a conclusion. Cool, cool. We got a few more minutes left, so we can probably start chapter 4. Chapter 4. The subject supposed to care. Nobody cares is a common refrain, repeated in headlines, articles, and social media, about a wide array of issues that many people seem actually to care quite a lot about. Nobody cares about the carers, about Haiti, about new COVID variants, about climate change. Nobody cares about political corruption, unraveling social institutions, scholasticide, gun violence, declining life expectancy, increasing suicide rates, rising anti Semitism, fires in Canada, floods in Greece, record breaking temperatures in Pakistan. An article on why the Middle East doesn't fully support Ukraine quoted a young Syrian man at a cafe in Berlin. Assad is still in power. The Russians still support him, and no one cares. A billionaire partial owner of the Golden State Warriors basketball team said, "Nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs." Okay, you bring it up because you really care. And I think it's nice that you really care. The rest of us don't care. I'm just telling you a hard, ugly truth. Of all the things I care about, yes, it's below my line. On October 3rd, 2023, an opinion piece arguing that the best Palestinians can hope for is a reservation type arrangement that the U.S. gave Indians and the British gave the Alborgians, ran in the Jewish press. The title, The Palestinians, a People About Whom Nobody Cares. 7 months later, the New York Times quoted Rafat Abatumia, one of 600,000 Palestinians pushed out of Rafah, which have previously been declared a safe zone by Israeli tanks and airstrikes. Because of Israel's U.S.-backed onslaught on Gaza, he and his family of 9 children have been forced to move 6 times. Abu Timia said, "No one even cares about all these women and children here." Since the issues and events about which no one allegedly cares are actually matters about which some people care quite deeply, why is the sentiment that nobody cares ubiquitous? My argument is that nobody cares points to the decline of symbolic efficiency. The absence of a symbolic space of registration that functions as the background knowledge that one can assume that others accept. There's no big other who cares or who sees us caring. Little others may care, but that's not enough to assure the feeling that, when it comes right down to it, we are on our own, especially with respect to the fundamental conditions of our life. Everything feels chaotic. We're awash in vibes without agency, submerged in catastrophic forces beyond our control. The subject of neo-feudalism is missing because there's no big other who can see it. They're on to neo-feudal's effective infrastructure. The neo-feudal social manner is populated by fragile, competitive others struggling within a border landscape of anxiety, fragmentation, shamelessness, and hierarchic dependence. Its effective infrastructure is built on what Lacanian psychoanalyst describes as the imaginary plane, a register of identification, aggression, and rivalry. Exploring this infrastructure involves tracking the effects of declining symbolic efficiency in a setting where capitalism is increasingly no longer recognizably capitalist, but something else. Rather than relying on a subject in the sense of modernity's disciplined citizen or psychoanalysis, neurotic neo-feudalism, obs- neurotic neo-feudalism absorbs us in a psychotic atmosphere of unrelenting demands and overwhelming enjoyment in a setting lacking symbolic bearings. Lacan distinguishes between the normal and psychotic subject. The normal subject goes about their business in an uncertain world, not questioning everything too closely, accepting a kind of good enough consciousness about the way the world works, unable to access the commonly accepted symbolic order. The psychotic creates a delusion, becomes fixated on what Lacan calls a captivating image. A captivating image. We might think of the ways issues circulate as images, indexing a psychotic atmosphere. Unending streams of photos of murdered children, snipers on the top of university buildings, demolished cities, and so on can make us feel crazy. Why is this happening? Why doesn't anybody do anything? Images covering the holes in meaning. The absence of a signifying structure in which common sense can be made. The psychotic adapts by fastening on the image, using it to get their bearings. Within a dialectic of imagery identification. Does the image mirror the ego back to itself, or does it reflect an aggressor? Does one see oneself or one's rival? The captivating image does not offer a position from which to see oneself as a subject. Remaining at the level of the imagery, it's an object within a realization characterized by identification, aggression, and rivalry. There's no third symbolic space or terrain of meaning. Psychosis index the ways that people living in neo-feudalizing times try to become subjects by creating meaning in the context of a war around meaning. Words mean different things to different people. Everything has their own definition. If one can identify with something, it matters. If one can't, then that something will likely be feared or hated. We feel threatened or aggressed by everything around us, fighting for our survival in systems beyond our control. In his classic study of feudalism, Mark Bloch tells us that behind a social life there was a background of the primitive, of the submission to uncontrollable forces of unreliable physical contrasts. This background is neo-feudalism's foreground. Networked personalized media, extreme inequality, and climate change in a setting where nothing makes sense. Where cruelty and violence run rampant, with images, words, languages, and grammar are weapons in terrain of battle. And in this illuminating exploration of ordinary psychosis, Darien Leader sets out the three types of psychosis recognized by the Lacan field: paranoia, schizophrenia, and melancholia. Interesting. Paranoia is characterized by a sense of persecution. For the paranoiac, it's always someone else's fault. The paranoiac is in the position of a complainant, pointing to the fault in the other. Hmm? I don't fully agree with that, but as leaders make clear, contemporary society is a habited, condu- conduce, conduct, conducive to flourishing of paranoia. Not only are we enjoying to think of ourselves as victims, but we receive validation for detailing the trauma and justice that we suffer. The paranoid may strive to be an adjacent of change, opposing cruelty and corruption. Often paranoia manifests in attachment to the certainty, whether one found in the truths of ancient text or in detailed and comprehensive knowledge of oppression. Again, the effective infrastructure of neo-feudalizing society supports these attributes as it encourages everyone to do what they can to save the world and enjoins us to find out for ourselves the real truth behind the lies, even as there is no space where divergent truths are reconciled. To be sure, in a brutal, violent world, there are real victims and there are good and true fighters against oppression. What we lack is agreement on who they are. Per- Perpetually suspicious of the rule of power and enjoyment. Who are the monsters and who are the heroes? With schizophrenia, the other is not an essential oppressor. The other is inside. The subject isn't separate from the other. My thoughts may be the thoughts of someone else. The schizophrenic isn't sure. Any message could mean anything, come from anywhere. The schizophrenic may not recognize their own body, wondering if it is someone else or experiencing it as a surface to where they have no real attachment. Finally, the third type of psychosis, the melancholia involves self-blame. Anything that's wrong is my fault. The melancholic, I'm probably saying that fucking terribly wrong and butchering that, but repeats an endless litany of self-loathing. How useless and awful they are. Doom scrolling confirms it. The right is generally more likely to fall into paranoia, and the left is into melancholiac self-hatred, but the terms right and left are unstable. Most useful for those who want to say what they are not. Those who feel buffeted between the two are by the relentless and ongoing effects of economic immersion, climate catastrophe, and genocide in a setting where nobody cares, might fall into a sort of everyday schizophrenia, alienated from punished by their own bodies, unable to shake tormenting and intrusive thoughts. Again, my claim is not that people are these sorts of subjects. It's that the effective atmosphere of neo-feudalism is psychotic, and these three types of psychosis, paranoia, schizophrenia, and melancholia, provide the patterns for imagining oneself and one's experiences that the social manner it occurs. Most people in political orientations resist easy categorization, as we're increasingly reminded everyone is different. Nothing compares to anything. Neophilism's psychotic anxieties pervade the fried terrain of identity politics. For some, attachment to an identity provides grounding in a harsh, uncertain world. They can anchor their politics in their identity, speaking for their own experience as well as the experience of the people. For others, identity doesn't determine politics. Politics determines identity. Their politics tell them who they are. When another challenges, criticizes, or rejects their politics, they experience it as a personal assault. In both instances, critique makes a space unsafe. It places in question the core of one's being. We saw examples of the complex uncertainties disrupting identity politics and its reflexionation intensify around Jewish identity in the wake of October 7th, 2023. Al-Aqsa flood operation, Israel and the U.S. subsequent genocide against the Palestinians, and the rise of global movement for Palestinian liberation. Some Jewish Americans experienced the attack on Israel as deeply personal assault on their very existence. Other Jewish Americans led demonstrations calling for a ceasefire and denouncing Israel's indiscriminate use of force against citizens. Some non-Jewish identified themselves as Zionist or criticized anti-Zionist for being anti-Semitic, even when the anti-Semitists were Jewish. Jewish identity was invoked as a ground for supporting and for condemning Israel, as a basis for joining as well as for fearing the encampments that swept U.S. universities in April 2024. For all its publicly demonstrated intensity, none of it was new. As Anthony Lerman documents, Jewish people have been engaged in enormously hateful and bitter debate over anti-Semitism and its relation of anti-Zionism and the critique of Israel's state policies since at least the 1970s. The debate connects with, draws on, and mutually reinforces deeper social, cultural, and political fractures, which characterize a world where post-truth, fake news, and alternative facts undermine the values of trust, integrity, and critical discourse. Barnaby Rain explicitly emphasizes the paranoia providing all sides now, anti-Semites, anti-Semites, those who feel they might be threatened, and those skeptical of anything taking the focus off Palestine. Identity politics and its reflexionalization collapse the significant into the subject, the significer into the subject, signifier into the subject. Sorry about that. Lacan famously said that the signifier represents the subject for another signifier. With the collapse of politics into identity, instead of the signifier taking the place of the subject, instead of the utterance running on its own momentum, along a path determined by a chain of significations, there is just the person making the utterance. What they say matters less than who they are, friend or enemy, instead of the question, why are you telling me this? There is only space for the question, who are you? We don't ask what people said. We only want to know who said it. Who said that? The answer allows us to perform millions of automatic classifications, operations, turning our minds into ranking algorithms, determining the status of the speaker, their worthlessness to speak, the threat potential that they pose. If the wrong person says it, the statement, observation, or content is suspect. If the right person says it, then we agree in advance. Both fastening politics on identity and identity on the politics attempt to combat the decline of symbolic efficiency. They struggle on the imaginary plane in the ceaseless rivalry between me and the other. Words might be defined differently, but we can hold on to the other own experiences. Speak for ourselves, assert the commitments that define us as a communist, as a mother, as an anti-imperialist. Absent shared meaning and references, we have nothing to turn to but ourselves, our experiences. We may not be psychotic in an individual pathological sense, but the atmosphere in which we try to think and breathe forces us into the paranoid, rivalrous, rivalrous struggle where someone is out to get us and we have no one to blame but ourselves. As the voices on our screens and in our heads never cease reminding us, anxiety doesn't deceive. The intensifies tendencies around mental health, language, and even jokes attest to the extreme vulnerability of the subject unable to find place and protection in a chains of signifiers. Anything I say is who I am, my core. If you say something that is anything less than affirming, you have harmed me, dealt a blow. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but slogans will eradicate my very existence. Rather like the side effect of Diller in Don DeLillo's White Noise. In the novel, Diller is an experimental drug for eliminating the fear of death. One of Diller's side effects is collapsing the difference between signifier and signified. One person says, "Hail of bullets," and the other drops to the ground terrified. I'm suggesting that the collapse between signifier and subject is even worse. The words of another harm me not because I can't tell the difference between words and objects, but because I can't tell the difference between words and the person who utters them. Your disagreement denies my right to exist. When you say something I can't accept, you are trying to kill me. How could I ever feel safe knowing you are out there?